Hey, I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello, everyone. You are listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I am your host, Rachel Dalton. I hope you are all doing well. Happy holidays, whatever you celebrate, whether it be Hanukkah or Christmas, or I believe Kwanzaa was just a day or two ago. And Happy New Year. I am recording this just a couple days before we usher in 2024, which is hard to believe. I sound like my father here, but time really does go faster the older you get. I feel like it was just 2021, which was a particularly awful year for me, so I wouldn't like to go back there, but still I feel like I was just there. That's actually kind of one of the things the main thing actually that I want to cover in the intro this week is the new year. People who have listened to this podcast for some time will know that I don't really do resolutions in the traditional sense. You know, I knew that this year I wanted to focus more on my health. I knew that I wanted to work on learning Spanish. I knew that I wanted to work on more career-focused related things. But I didn't really necessarily, everything that I did kind of boiled down to a few words. Intention and value, and health, and balance. So I was really, everything that I did, I kind of wanted to approach with those words in mind. And the last episode of 2022, I actually interviewed somebody who at the time, I had only known for a couple of months, but I knew that she was going to be a very good friend of mine, and lo and behold, I was right. She is now one of my closest friends, and in fact, I'm supposed to go meet her for drinks in like 20 minutes, so gotta hurry this up. But I had my good friend Sam on the show, and we talked a lot about how reflection can be a very good thing, and how setting intention based on looking backwards can help you to learn going forward and to I don't know. It was a really good episode though. I'm just failing to have the words that to describe it are not coming to me. I have had a glass of colada flavored Baileys. Shout out to my cousin Beth for getting that for me for Christmas in our cousin booze exchange, which if you don't do that you should, because it's really fun. But I digress. This year I really focused on those words. I wanted to attack things with more intention, attack them in ways that more aligned with my values. I wanted, over the course of my entire life, I haven't really had to focus much on my health because I've been in shape without really trying to be, which I know is a gift and makes me very privileged. Not everybody has that experience. And I wanted to just kind of lead a more balanced life. The lessons that I had to learn this year had to do with imposter syndrome and overcoming that. They had to do with really learning what it's like to be in my body and making that a priority. And they had to do with learning to be loved in a healthy way. Because you don't really realize it, but when you've been loved in an unhealthy way your entire life, being loved healthily feels weird, feels different. You're not really sure what to make of it. And I kind of realized that everything that I want to take with me from these lessons, the somatic work that I've done, this work that I've done in this relationship, this work that I've done in my career, to overcome this imposter syndrome, everything kind of boils down to one word. And so my word of 2024 is going to be, drum roll please, worthy. Just understanding that I am worthy of these opportunities that have been given to me, these roles that I get to play, this job that I transitioned to and that I'm doing way better in than I thought that I was. I am worthy of these friendships that I've developed. I'm worthy of this beautiful relationship that I have been granted after so much strife. And I am worthy of taking care of my body. That was a really big aha moment I had this year when doing my somatic practices, was realizing, oh man, I take really, really, really good care of my inner self, my mental health, I go to therapy all the time. I think through things. I journal. I have a really good self-care process for my mental health, but I haven't done a very good job of taking care of my exterior vessel for that inner self. And it was really an aha moment where I was like, wow, but I'm worthy of that. I am deserving of that. And so, yeah, worthy. That kind of has encapsulated everything. And I was like, well, there are other words that maybe, no, everything kind of boils down to me to worthy. And so going into 2024, that is going to be my reminder to myself, that in each of these things that come my way, in each of these opportunities, in every one of these challenges that I have to face, that these things are thrown at me because I can handle them, and that I have the tools, and I am worthy of the rewards that I'm going to reap. And so are you. So with that, going forward into 2024, I give you the gift of acknowledging that you are indeed worthy. With that, I'm super excited for this podcast interview. Today, I'm going to have Phyllis on the show. She is the author of a book called America in Therapy, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The release date of the book is July 9th, so I absolutely recommend that you go ahead and pre-order that. And you'll get a taste of what it's about in this conversation. It's really a fascinating concept, this idea that, and I wasn't sure, I knew that this was a really important conversation. I wanted to highlight it as either, an important number or the beginning of a year or the end of a year, in some way, but I wasn't sure where. But it really occurred to me that going into 2024, which is an election year, it is important to consider this idea about American therapy and how individual issues that we face on a personal level can be seen in our politics, which is really what this episode is all about. And we talk a lot about the symptoms and the evidence for that thesis in this episode, but I would love to have Phyllis on later this year, maybe in, next year. It's technically 2023 still. But I would love to have Phyllis on maybe towards the release date of the book, where maybe we can talk more about the fix and how we can help America, and frankly, not just America, all these other countries are facing similar issues around the world. But yes, American Therapy, July 9th, 2024 is the release date. You can pre-order it from all major booksellers, and you're gonna get a taste of what the book has to offer in this conversation. Like I said, going into an election year, and me myself being pretty anxious about the 2024 election. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but my partner, I do work to protect his privacy as I would any person that I was dating. But he is an immigrant. And so there are things that I worry about just in terms of the election. And, I don't think that anything could happen in regards to that, but never say never, right? I mean, I feel like in the past 5 years, so many things have happened that I just never thought could happen. And so the 2024 is an election that does cause me some anxiety, more so than usual, I would say. So understanding where these issues come from, this populist agenda that has come up, understanding where it comes from and how you can see it in individuals and in interpersonal relationships between humans walking around every day, and how that transcends all the way up to the people who are at the very top of the government, and how it permeates how the government is run itself. It's really extremely fascinating, and I'm really excited that I got to have this conversation. And yeah, look forward to the question of how do we fix it, because I personally would like to know the answer. So yeah, it's not going to be, the like super positive, exciting, rose-colored glasses way to end 2023, but it's realistic. And I think I myself at age 33 have gotten to the point where I'm kind of over looking towards the new year with these rose-colored glasses of, this is going to be my year, nothing bad is going to, it's not realistic. So there's going to be some good and there's going to be some bad. And I kind of like the idea of looking towards 2024 and the political atmosphere that we're going to have to face in 2024 with some reality and with some tools that are going to be featured here in this book and in this conversation. So with that, remember you are worthy. Happy New Year. I'm going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then please enjoy my conversation with Phyllis.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, an actual play podcast in the game world of Masks, a new generation. Join our heroes as they struggle to build a team and save the city. Can Titan escape the shadow of his mentor burnout? Is Soul's overwhelming power too dangerous to control? Will Muse discover her past? And how does White Knight stomach all those strange snacks? Listen to Delinquent Comics to find out at allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. New issues become available to all citizens every other Monday.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am very excited to have the conversation I'm going to have with my guest today. Today, I'm talking to Phyllis Leavitt, who is going to talk to us about her new book, America in Therapy. Phyllis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me here with you.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating topic. You're studying something that I think we should have been studying a long time ago, but I'm very fascinated by the topic and interested to kind of dive in. Let's kind of get started with just tell me a little bit about you, where you come from, what you do, how you came to be here. I know you have a couple of other books. Just tell us about you.
Yeah. Well, I have been a psychotherapist for over 30 years, and I also initially did quite a bit of therapy myself as a client. And I come from a background of some childhood trauma of my own, which is really what got me into looking at the world of psychology to begin with. And and when I was really young, I sort of went on a spiritual kind of journey, and actually that took me to the world of psychology because I realized that there were things that really needed to be healed in me that were of a psychological nature. And so I went to therapy when my first two children were young, or my three children were young, and it really opened up, like some of the puzzle pieces of myself began to fall in place from that perspective and with that learning. And I was the co-director of a sexual abuse treatment program for a couple of years before I went full-time into private practice. And I had a very solid grounding in the world of abuse dynamics. And what I really learned over all the years of being in private practice with, not a criminal population, not a hospitalized population, but, just sort of like I always say, ordinary people like you and me. What I found was that there is really a very, very large epidemic of all kinds of abuse in our society happening on a family level, on a
Mm.
continuum from, unavailability and addiction and depression and anxiety to overt physical and sexual violence and even pushing people out of families altogether. And the amount of suffering that I saw on an individual level really was quite overwhelming to me, and really kind of woke me up to the need for our psychological recovery in this country. And then where that kind of mushroomed out, and this is what leads up to where my book comes from. One of the great gifts of psychotherapy today is that there's a family therapy lens through which we look at the individual. And that means that, I think when psychology first started, it was what's wrong with that person? They have
Right.
complexes, they have an Oedipal complex, or, that kind of thing. And we were kind of seen as psychological islands. And what the whole world of family therapy opened up was that we are very much a product of the environments that raise us, that condition us, that respond to us or don't respond to us, and how they respond to us. And that started with a great focus on the family of origin, the people who raise us. And and then as the world of family therapy kind of expanded, we began to realize that all systems, all groups of people are families on larger and larger levels, and they operate on the same dynamics as individual families. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And so, in a nutshell, what that means is that we, through the world of psychology, we began to identify what are some of the elements of a healthy family, given that no family is perfect. No one is perfect. We're all human. We all have our tender spots. We all have our wounds that we react from. But the basic elements of a relatively healthy family are that there's love, that there's bonding, that there's valuing of each other, that there is a level of cooperation that is expected and that is satisfying to participate in, that there are good boundaries, that we learn where one person ends and the other's needs or wants or individuality begins,
Right.
and that there are peaceful ways, nonviolent ways to resolve conflict. That's one of the big ones of a healthy family. And again, nobody does this perfectly. People do fight or they do disagree strongly. But in a healthy environment, there's a way to come back to resolve differences and to reconnect with one another. Um, and so, we began to look at through the lens of family therapy at the places where people work, the school systems that children grow up in, religious communities, creative spaces, and then going up the scale of human involvement all the way to how governments respond to people. That's so I look at the big family system that we're all in. Here is the family of America.
Right.
And are we operating on healthy dynamics? So please jump in. A lot more to say, obviously.
Yeah. No, I'm ready. I'm ready. My first question, like, automatically is, were you studying this prior to 2016?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've been a therapist since I started my very first clients I saw in 1989. Um, yeah, yeah, definitely studying this, and then realizing, partly from my own experience of my own healing journey, and partly from just extrapolating from all of the people that I was working with on an individual level, that there are, we're the lucky ones, the people who got to have input, and get a different perspective or get outside the conditioning that was not helpful or that was harmful in our own upbringing. And it dawned on me like pretty, like sort of like a slap in the head, that there are millions of people all over the world who never get rescued from abuse and neglect, who have no opportunity to get any kind of healing. People who are in war-torn countries, people who are condemned to a life of poverty with no way out, people who suffer religious persecution, um, all that kind of thing, and that we have that kind of abuse and neglect going on in our own country, that there are certain populations here that are targeted for neglect, or targeted to be more readily put in jail, or targeted because of their ethnicity, their gender, um, and all of those things. So we have masses of people who are suffering the effects of abuse, which we know quite a lot about in the world of psychology. What happens to people when they're mistreated by other human beings and they never get escape and they don't get any help to recover themselves? So a lot of my book, a good portion of my book is devoted to really helping people, us. My book is written for the layman.
Mm-hmm.
I want this to be common knowledge. What happens to people if they get hurt by other human beings, if they're treated cruelly, and they never get rescued, they never get any kind of help? And because a lot of the symptoms are known, and a lot of the symptoms we see rampantly happening in our country. And just to, say one specific thing, the epidemic of mass shootings
Yes.
is the tip of that iceberg. It's one part of the tip of that iceberg that shows us that as a family of America, we are suffering. We are not mentally well. So jump in, because I'm not
Yeah, no, no,
sure
no.
where I was going with all that.
That's a great place to start. And mass shootings have recently in 2023 hit really close to home for me. So I'm originally from East Lansing, Michigan, home of Michigan State University, which was
Right,
targeted just 2 months ago.
right.
I don't live there, but that's where my family is.
Yeah.
My brother was on campus just a few hours before the gunman was there.
Oh.
And it's funny because in those, my brother he said, it's like we've joined some fucked up trauma club where you
Mm,
think, well, now that it's me and now that it's my community and I'm seeing how it's impacting people, now something has to change,
yeah,
which is, privileged and selfish. But then it dawns on you very, very slowly that, oh shit, it hasn't changed any of the other times. It didn't change after Sandy Hook. It didn't change after
right,
January 6th. It hasn't changed at all.
right,
Why would it change now just because it's me?
right.
And that's that, like what he said, those words, trauma club, is kind of exactly what you're talking about. I mean, mass shootings are trauma. They're traumatic for the people who are in them. There was somebody on MSU's campus who was they were wearing a t-shirt from Oxford High School. Just
Mm,
I think like 16 months ago, there was a shooting at another at a high
mm,
school in Michigan.
mm.
That kid survived that shooting at the high school, went to Michigan State University, and was in that mass shooting as well. I mean,
Oh,
they survived, thank goodness. But can you
yeah,
imagine that within a 2-year time period to
yeah.
have gone through 2 mass shootings at 2 different schools?
Yeah, I mean, we are living in a culture, a family culture in this country that is traumatizing everyone, and obviously some people more than others. But let me zoom out for just a minute, because one of the things that I want to put as sort of a frame around the picture of
Mm-hmm.
everything that we're talking about today is, um, there there's good news and there's bad news. And like when people go to the doctor, often they get the bad news first. This is what's causing the pain, or this is
Right.
what's causing the fever, and this is what needs to be done. This is the intervention that needs to happen to alleviate your pain and hopefully cure your condition. So sometimes that's bad news. Sometimes it's cancer. Sometimes
Right.
it's you need heart surgery. But the good news is that there's a lot known in the medical profession of how to help you. And that's how I look at the field of psychology in relationship to our country right now. Um, I think the field of psychology is in a position to diagnose and really name some of the big problems that we're suffering from that are causing the terribly painful symptoms that so many people are suffering from. And it's also in a position to offer help, because what the second sort of agenda of my book, besides diagnosing, and I use that word lightly, I'm not giving it like, a DSM category of diagnosis.
Diagnosis of the state of America.
Yeah, it's really like looking at this is what we're suffering from. And then this is what we know from the field of psychology and treating individuals and families and couples and children. What can be done to restore us to
Right.
love and connection, to better boundaries, and to nonviolent conflict resolution?
Well, it's like we have the framework, we just need to apply it in a new way.
Absolutely. I think that's a really big missing piece in our country, that, we look to IT people for the best technological help. We want the best of everything except human relations. We've really settled for very outdated and very destructive human relations, as if there's no other choice when there actually is. There are a lot of choices, and they really do mean, and I have to say this, they do mean the shakeup of a lot of the way that we operate. Um, just like if a family comes to therapy and one parent, let's just say, is beating the kids or screaming all the time or coming home drunk and falling asleep on the floor or in a rage or whatever, or spending all the money. That family has to make some big changes if they're going to heal. And I think that's part of what is being called for in our country today. Um, and the motivation, I hope, can be that we really get that we can't go on this way and without hurting more and more and more people and having more really deleterious effects. But the frame is that there's hope. The frame is that we do know things to do that help break the cycle of abuse and restore people to love and connection and safety and peace, and restore people to a place where they have tools for when the next conflict comes up. They have a way to go that is not pulling out a gun or slamming the door in someone's face or never speaking to them again. Um, because on a national level, those ways of coping don't work. And they,
No, and that's become very clear.
yeah, become very, very clear. And the other piece of the good news that I really want to emphasize is, a lot of times people ask me, well, why do you think it's worse? Why do you think it's escalating? Why do you think it's so bad? And I don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, I think it's a perfect storm of a lot of things coming together.
Agreed.
But the thing that I want to say that I think is positive is that I really do believe that with all of, like, the effort to uncover, what's been secret and what's been kept hidden and what's happening behind closed doors on a government level, let's say, or on a big business level or on a criminal justice level, there's so much desire to actually know the truth. And that's a good thing. Even if the truths that we reveal are painful to see and sometimes feel overwhelming to change, the fact that people really do want to know the truth, and that there's a rising sense of it's not okay to treat people badly. It's not okay to target Black people. It's not okay that the Equal Rights Amendment has never been passed so that women are not entitled to equal pay for equal work. Or it's
Right.
not okay that a religious community is targeted for the clothes they wear. And so that rise of humanism and that desire to know the truth actually is really positive. And one of the things that psychotherapy does, and I can't emphasize this enough, because if we could even begin to incorporate this into our family of America, we would already have a different country. And that is that one of the first things that happens in a psychotherapeutic environment is that we make it safe to tell the truth. even the
Mm.
uncomfortable truths.
Mm-hmm.
Even the truths of like what I did that wasn't so nice. It's not always what happened to me that was traumatic. Sometimes my own behavior needs examining.
Yes, and we're lacking that too, I think. Not just on a government level, but on a people level as well.
Yeah, yeah, that it's okay. People do make mistakes. We do hurt each other. And if we can own it and we can be safe and we know that we're in an environment where, and I'm not talking about overt criminal behavior where someone murders another person,
Right, right.
they're still entitled, I think, and need healing. They may need to be separated from the rest of society for us to be safe. Um, but that we make it safe to actually tell the whole truth. And this is something, and because what we know is that, and these are some big elements of what I talk about in my book and what I learned from years and years of being a psychotherapist. And again, let me stop myself, because if you want to ask more questions, I tend to go on and on. So let
Oh
me.
no, this is wonderful. I mean, you're actually covering a lot of the questions that I have had in my brain as you're talking. So I'm just gonna let you go.
Okay, great. Because one of the things that I think is very hard for us to absorb, and I think many people actually really don't know this, just because it's not common knowledge, um, and that is what I have observed over all the years of working. I've worked with a tremendous amount of abuse, and I mean, I have had clients who look like they're functioning, just like you and me. They go to work, they pay their bills, they raise their kids. Um, they have friends, and they're suffering deeply from abuse that you can't even imagine could
Right,
happen behind people's closed doors. Um, Rape. Um, I had a client whose father cut her with a broken bottle. I mean, and these are these are people who they're just really really out of control and suffering. So the point I want to make, and I tend to share this a lot because I feel like this is the piece that I feel like is not common knowledge. That is that when there's abuse in a family, so I'm going to talk about the microcosm, just the individual family.
great.
When there's abuse in a family, and let's just say it's physical violence, for example,
Okay,
um, and you can't get away. The abuser is stronger than you and you're dependent on the abuser. Let's say if you're a child, um, and even a spouse often feels dependent on an abuser.
right.
You're,
Financially, there's that a lot.
yeah,
Yeah,
very often that. Um, so you can't get away. You have to find a way to cope. Let's say a child who's being beaten. And there's no one to protect them. The abuser's bigger and stronger than them. They can't get away. They have to do something to try. They do their best. We all do our best to try to survive things that are really, that they're unsurvivable in a certain way on a psychological level, but we do our best. So what some people tend to do when there's really no way out is they become very passive. They stop, they lose even the impulse to fight back because there's never been any success at fighting back. And
mm,
so this is a dynamic that's internalized, and in psychology it's called learned helplessness. We actually learn to be helpless because we were, not because we're bad or stupid or lazy or less than or flawed, but because we actually were helpless, and that's what we internalized. And unfortunately, people carry that in with them into their adulthood. And so even when they don't live with that particular abuser anymore, they tend, and this is all on a continuum, obviously, but they tend to then be targeted by other dominating abusive people, because dominating abusive people look for people they can dominate. And the most easily dominated people are people who learn to be helpless, if that makes sense, or learn to be
definitely.
passive. And the other main outcome are the whole group of people who don't take on the dynamic of learned helplessness. and they take on the dynamic that's called identification with the aggressor, and they're not going to be dominated, and they become aggressive and they identify with aggressive people. And these are some of the kids that become the bully on the playground,
Hmm.
or some of the kids that rally around and support the bully because they're desperate to feel powerful when they were really overpowered. Okay? So,
Yeah.
two things about that we all really need to know, and that is that when both sort of sets of patterns of people emerge from abusive environments without help, they tend to enact these roles in their adult lives with their families and in the larger society. But they're all victims of abuse. So, somewhere inside each one of them is someone who's been dominated and hurt by other people.
Yeah. That's always interesting. I was bullied in like middle school,
Mm-hmm.
and it has left like quite a profound impact on me and my trust, and
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
friendships, my especially my
Mm-hmm.
female friendships have been really heavily impacted by the mean girl frenemy dynamic that I repeated in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
And it's funny how I've come to this position now. My favorite thing to say is it's an explanation, not an excuse.
Mm.
I say that a lot. And it's funny how I am able to have empathy for the people who were unkind to me
Yeah.
now. And
Yeah.
I think that that's really important. It doesn't change the fact that what they did was fucked up and profoundly impacted me.
Right.
But I understand that they were what they were going through, that they were going through a significant amount of pain in their own personal life, and they
Yes.
needed to feel better in some way. And for whatever reason, picking on me made them feel better.
Right. It made them feel powerful over someone when they were the overpowered one. And that's kind of how the dynamic of gets perpetuated.
And you can see that in I mean, it's unavoidable to talk about politics here. Like you can
Yeah,
see that in Donald Trump.
absolutely.
1000%. You can see
Absolutely.
that exact thing. I mean, I watch him. Well, I try not to watch him on television, but when I see the things that he says, and I'm just like, this person is this is like a little privileged, scared boy
Right.
who has just been so bullied. Also, probably has had everything handed to him, and I also think he's probably mentally ill.
Right.
But at base, there is somebody who was like really had a really really fucked up childhood, I believe.
And I think that's kind of known, actually. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot written about that. And that actually points to a third cause of someone becoming an abuser. And not everybody does, for sure, but there's a rising tide of this in our society. The more children are not cared for well in their homes, the more they're susceptible to either being dominated by someone who is overempowered or becoming, a perpetrator themselves. But there's another element that creates that, which interestingly enough, I've seen a couple of times in my practice. I used to work a lot with children in the very beginning of my practice, and I had two little kids that I worked with who were under 5, who were running the house. They had tantrums, they screamed, and what they had, like, these sort of kind parents who didn't know how to make any limits and boundaries. And so what they would do was, when the child had a tantrum, they'd just try to quiet them down by giving them what they were having a tantrum over. So I literally had a 3-year-old who was running her entire house. She wouldn't go to bed. She kept everybody up at night. She wouldn't do a lot of things. She wouldn't wear the clothes they told her, put on clean clothes. She wouldn't get ready for school or preschool. And it was really because there were no limits and boundaries.
Right.
And, and I had another little boy who was the same. And so that's another cause of it's inappropriate over empowerment can cause a person to really believe, if no one stops them, they grow up believing that they're entitled to have that amount of power. And And we do see that happening in government. We do see that in some of the people who have gotten into positions of power, that they actually believe they're entitled to tell everybody what to do.
Sounds
And
like my ex-boyfriend.
yes, on all levels that occurs. And that's a kind of narcissism that is very, very dangerous when a person gets in a position of great authority over other people, because the other people actually don't really exist for them as sensate human beings who have hearts and minds and needs, um, and are equal in value to them. They don't perceive that. So it's, and this is all, these are all forms of mental illness. um, be and just to go back to the point of that, some of the worst perpetrators are some of the most severely abused among us. There's a lot of research going on now into some of who these mass shooters are and what happened to them.
Yeah.
How did they get to the place where they were so disturbed that they wanted to kill random people that they didn't even know? Something led up to that. They weren't born that way.
No.
And so
There
we,
are there are people who are born psychopaths, but I would say a very small number of them actually
yeah,
end up
I
being
mean, I
mass
think there are
shooters.
people who are born with some kind of brain anomaly where they're just
Mhm.
really not functioning right.
Right.
Um,
But
yeah,
you can tell, like the people who are in the news. I mean, I'm torn with it, right? Because like on one hand, I want the victims to have the spotlight. I don't necessarily want the shooter to have the spotlight. But at the same time, we really do, like you're saying, need to be studying what's going on here
right,
so
right.
that we can make changes. But it's very clear. It's very clear that that the majority of these people that we're seeing are extremists, which I would argue is a type
Right.
of mental illness,
Yes.
or they have their own trauma that they're coming to terms with or struggling to come to terms with.
Or that they have been brainwashed, that they are so isolated within a community that has a destructive mindset and is mentally disturbed in terms of their relationships with other human beings, that they're brainwashed into believing that what they're doing is actually right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another, danger that we face. Um, but the point being that I see an escalation of this in our society, an escalation of people who are so downtrodden that they really don't think they have choices or can make it, and other people who are assuming levels of power that are inappropriate and cruel in relationship to other people to serve their own needs and their own
Yeah.
ends.
Well, I guess that kind of leads to like this, like, what do we do question, right? Like, and I imagine that there's multiple different, the way that I'm visualizing it is there's two main points of attack. You have to attack it from a government level and you have to attack it from an individual level. Um,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
how do you visualize that working in both of those ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we start is trying to make it common knowledge, and this again is one of the points of my book. Um, make it common knowledge. What are some of the things that really work to help people heal? Um, because on one level, we are as healthy as of a society as we are as individuals. Um, on the other hand, people in positions, great positions of power, have so much control and influence over the ordinary person that
Yes.
um, that it's more difficult to treat on that level of power, because for many reasons. But let me just start with some of the elements that really work in a therapy situation. And I like to picture someone being in Congress and um, working with opposing points of view and opposing parties with some of the elements of good psychotherapy, which are designed to bring people together and resolve conflict and bring them back into connection with one another and cooperation with one another and some kind of workable agreement, because that's what we do in families, right? Families come to therapy because there's some kind of conflict or there's some kind of problem that no one knows how to address, and the ways they're trying to address it aren't working. Okay.
Right.
And usually it boils down to that there's some really big gap in their communication that's going on that doesn't allow resolution to take place, whether people become entrenched in their own position or they've assumed some moral high ground or whatever they've done. But anyway, the elements that we work with in good psychotherapy are number one, what I first mentioned, and that is that we create an environment where it's safe to say whatever needs to be said. We actually teach people how to listen to one another the way that they want to be heard. And that's one of the big missing elements in our
Mm-hmm.
larger national conversation, that people are not speaking to one another the way that they would like to be spoken to.
No, they are not.
They're not listening to one another the way that they are demanding to be heard. Um, and so we create that. We teach people really good communication skills about reflective listening and not jumping in, but listening to the whole thing that a person says, and really actually listening the way that you want to be heard. And part of the element of that is restraint. You don't get to scream and yell when you don't agree or your feelings are hurt. You have to learn some kind of inner control to your most violent, destructive, or reactive impulses. And because if there isn't that kind of safety in the room, then it's not safe to speak our truth.
Right, right. And that's the whole point for
Yeah,
all of this.
that's the whole point. And this alone, any one of these elements alone would create huge change. We don't have that modeled in the highest levels of our family of America.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it's become acceptable to call people names and rage or filibuster and not let anybody talk, or um, you know you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yes.
threaten threaten and
Yep.
incite violence if toward the people that don't agree with your point of view.
Yep.
And these are things we would never tolerate in a family. And that
No. Oh my gosh, no.
and that's one of the things that has me understand the level of mental illness that's pervading our country and that is influencing our country, because the very things that we want for ourselves, we and that we wouldn't allow, that we would call the police if someone broke into our house and was going to take our furniture, right? We allow our government to do that. We allow our government to assault and take other people's belongings, land, whatever resources that don't belong
Mm-hmm.
to us.
Yeah.
Um, so this is huge gap in our psychological well-being that is then filtering back down from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting with safety and communication, restraint from violent reactions, and one of the big ones is that we really, and sometimes you have to break let me see, break the container and just focus on one person for a minute. Doesn't Not breaking the container, but changing the container. So if someone's really having a terrible time and they just can't control their rage, then we work with that. Where's that rage coming from? What happened to you? What did you learn? What is being triggered in you that is creating this level of reactivity so that you actually can't hear the other person? And then we work with that. And, most often, 99% of the time, there's something very significant that's unhealed in the person. They were beaten as a kid. They were raped. They were bullied. They had a learning disability and people made fun of them.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that they really depended on died when they were 4. Um, so it goes back. We take people back to the origins with compassion and guidance. And we really work with very well-known techniques of psychotherapy to help heal those hurting parts that are still inside of us. And sometimes, and this is one of the beauties of that kind of work. I'll give you a good example. So I had a woman who had a very lonely childhood. She had a single mom who was very depressed and unavailable. And she ended up being the kid on the playground that always got left out. She was just a lonely kid. And her mom didn't help. Her mom was too depressed to really enter her life and help her get friends and just do the things that a more
Right.
put together parent would be able to do. This woman got married. She had a child of her own and very quickly got divorced. And then she was the single mother with the child. And she got a job as an office manager. And one of her employees was a very insecure woman, just like herself.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't stand this woman.
Mm-hmm.
She
Yep.
made this woman's life miserable. And it was all the projection of what had happened to her that was unhealed that she was projecting onto this woman. And when she was in therapy and she was able to get in touch with that really lonely, aching little girl inside of her and begin some of that healing work with her, she all of a sudden, literally in the middle of a session, was like, oh my God, I have treated this woman the way I was treated.
Mm.
And
We repeat patterns.
we repeat patterns. And she was able to take responsibility for her own behavior that came out of a deep wound. She wasn't a bad person. She was a very wounded person. And that's one of the key elements, is the ability to reflect on ourselves and take responsibility for ourselves. And that's the biggest healing element in any relationship, is I take responsibility for me, my
Mm-hmm.
behavior, my beliefs, my patterns, and I work to heal them. And when I heal them, I'm going to be a different person in relationship to you. Am I going to be perfect? No, I'm not. But I'm going to be better, and I'm willing to learn and be open to being, to, continuing that self-reflective journey.
Definitely. Introspection. Yeah. I mean, but what do you do when the people who probably most need this, people who probably most need therapy, who probably most need to get in touch with their inner child, who
Mhm.
most need to overcome this trauma, are the people who are so resistant to it? I always say, I've been therapized since I was like 6.
Uh-huh.
So and I'm still in therapy. I go to therapy once a week. I had therapy earlier today.
Mhm.
But there are some people out there and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, like, please go get therapy. And I know that they won't,
Yeah.
because, but so, I mean, how do you move forward when that's a huge roadblock in the way?
I think there's no easy answer to that question, but this is what I would say, is that it's kind of like we're in a dance with other people. And the typical dance is one person acts and the other one reacts. And then their reaction triggers something in the other person and they react. And we just
Sure.
go on and on and on, right? It's very unconscious and is usually quite out of control, right? It's just a action reaction pattern. And you can see that in a lot of the fights people have. They just have the same fight over and over again because they're triggering the same unhealed wounds in each other over and
Yep.
over again. When one person does a healing journey, they change the step in the dance. Does it mean it's automatically going to change the other person's step? No, but it will change something. Because if you are goading me, for instance, into a fight, that's your
Mm-hmm.
pattern. You provoke me, I react, you get me going, and then we're off to the races. If I don't react the way that you have typically expected that I would, because I've got some kind of restraint going on inside myself from whatever work I've done, then you don't have that power over me anymore. I mean, out in society, you could still kill me if you had a gun, for sure, you could. Um, but if enough of us change our step in the dance, if enough of us find our voice, if enough of us, and overcome some of our learned helplessness, for instance, and we find our voice, and we keep finding our voice, and we keep speaking truth, and there's more people speaking truth, and there's more people going out into the world having compassion for their neighbor and being generous and kind, and there already are millions of people who are already like this. There'll be a tipping point at some point, unless we wipe ourselves out. I mean, to me, I believe that we do what we can do. And so, just you having a podcast where you let somebody like me share my experience with a number of listeners who otherwise would never hear me talk, right? And maybe get something out of what I'm saying that they can take into their own lives. And all the other people that you've had on your show that have something to offer that's of value that other people can walk away with and apply to their own lives. Like this is how we raise the consciousness. This is how we tip the scales. When is it going to happen? I don't know. But I believe that we have human beings are so capable. We have done so many magnificent things, created like incredible art, technology, science, education, and the study of the human psyche and physics and outer space and medicine. I mean, the list goes on of where our intelligence has been able to take us. That I don't see any reason why we can't apply the same wisdom and drive to our mental well-being if we see the need for it. And so here we are speaking to the need for it. you know,
Yes. No,
I mean, basically
absolutely.
saying we do what we each can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can push our government as best as possible. We
Mhm,
can elect people
mhm.
who embody those values, who
Exactly.
value those same things. Um,
Exactly.
I feel like that's rare in politics because I feel like megalomaniacs kind of are attracted to that entire field. But it's happening on a slower level. I think that since 2016, more and more people have stepped up, being like, you know what, like
We
I'm
got to do
gonna
something.
try. Hmm.
And I agree with you. It's scary. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionate about what I'm saying in my book and in anyone I talk to, because it's really frightening what's happening. It's frightening the level of power that a few individuals can hold and hurt so many people at once. It's really, really frightening. Um, and we have, I come from a background, my response to what happened to me was much more learned helplessness than anything else. And so my whole healing journey was finding my voice and finding my power and finding my own authentic role in life that didn't mirror the way I had learned to cope. And it was a journey. And I feel like that's part of what I'm speaking to here is that there are a lot of people in our world who really don't have a lot of hope that things can change. They're just struggling to survive the best they can in their own world. And that's part of what I want to inspire is that our voice matters. Every single person's voice matters. I know, and you probably know from the work that you've done in your own life, that as you've grown and as you've healed, step by step, and the healing journey goes on, it's not over. Um, that your way of being in relationship has changed and it's healthier, and that's what we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, one person at a time, and it feels
Yep.
grueling, but it's kind of that, and trying to influence our government through voting and all of that good stuff. It's kind of what we have at this point. But it is such a interesting tie to look at. Okay, like we as a country are facing this mass trauma. We're all
Yeah.
suffering with this mass like mental illness.
Yeah.
And I really like that comparison to like a family and trying to, kind of reestablish healthy family boundaries. But it's difficult. It's definitely difficult, and it's
There's no
hard.
question. And when I think one of the very big misconceptions in our culture is, and certainly not with everyone, but I think it's still very prevalent in our culture, is that peaceniks are kind of, girly or weak or whatever. And I know from my experience myself and from working with other people that actually repairing relationship and creating peace is the hardest work a human being can ever do. It's much
Yep.
easier to react and fight.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And the other thing I really love to share is that, it has to do with this gap between what we all want for ourselves and what we would not want for ourselves, and yet what we allow government to perpetrate institutions, higher institutions of power, that not all government, some of it's big business, and even some very established religious
Right.
institutions, um, that, one of the reasons why psychotherapy and what psychology has to offer is so useful and so needed right now is because it's not partisan. We're not invested in the wife being right or the husband being right. We're invested in the family coming back together and
Yeah,
people loving one another and
definitely.
working things out. So it's not even about who's right and who's wrong. It's about listening and building empathy and making agreement and taking responsibility for oneself. So it cuts across party lines, which is something that I think we really, really need. And the other thing that I always say is that because of that, and because of some of the basic premises of psychotherapy, and I haven't named them all, but I've given you a few, what brings people to therapy is pain. They're coming to therapy to get out of the wars they're in, the wars with their spouses or their children or their boss or their friends. They're coming to therapy to relieve pain and find healthier ways to be in the world. Um, I don't know anyone who wants more violence in their life. So on an
Yeah.
individual level, you know, we're not asking from the larger institutions and the people in power in our country for anything that we don't already want for ourselves. And yet I find it absolutely, um, I don't know what the word is, absolutely something that the word love and the word safety and the word peace are not part of political discourse.
That's a ooh. That's I think that's I mean, we're running out of time here and that just left me with like I was like, "Oh, okay, this is like a nice like, concluding thought." And then I was like, "Oh, fuck, like now there's like an entirely new thing that I have to stay up thinking about when I can't fall asleep at night."
Yeah.
Um that's a I'm gonna have to think about that because that's a great point. And yeah, there's this idea that emotion is weak, and that's obviously has its basis in toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we definitely need to change that because being in touch with your emotions and being able to communicate your emotions healthily is really strong. It's one of the strongest things you can do.
And we need our emotions to sort of as one part of our guidance through life. If we didn't have, if something didn't cause pain and we didn't listen to it, we would be, and this is a whole other topic of conversation that we can't get into, because abuse causes pain. And when you can't have an appropriate reaction to pain, which is to call for help or get away or resist, then you have to adapt. And our adaptations to something that is potentially toxic and lethal to us can never work. They only help us survive, but they don't work in adulthood,
Hmm.
like passivity or
It's a
identity.
band-aid. It's not. It's not a fix.
Yeah, because it doesn't heal the wound. But there's a whole lot to say about that, and that'll have to be for a different discussion.
Different time. Well, with that, do you are there any last like concluding thoughts, things that you want people to know, like a big takeaway from this conversation from your book?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we've talked a lot about sort of the diagnosis end of it, but I really want to say that there's hope because I think any therapist can tell you that given that we're imperfect human beings and we still make mistakes and we'll always have our, some patterns that we're working out, we do see people heal. Healing is possible. It is possible to break the cycle of violence. And if it's possible within a family or within an individual or within a small organization, it's possible for our country. And I want to hold that. I want to hold that because I really believe that if we put our minds to it and we educated enough people about what the actual benefit to them would be, let alone the skills and the elements of what is required, that we could do it. And I hope and pray that we do. One of my biggest prayers is that my children and my grandchildren are going to inherit an earth that is safe for them, that's loving for them, that's even habitable.
Right.
And I think most of us want that. So could we come together around it,
It's a
and actually say, this is what we
common
want?
goal. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's I do have a lot to think about with this, and a lot to think about, what I can do on my end too.
Beautiful. And you're
It's
doing it,
definitely.
just what you're doing now. I just want
Yeah. Yeah. No,
yeah,
I am. I feel like I need to encourage other people to do it too.
right. Right.
Well, Phyllis, where can people find you? Where can people find the book? Keep up with what research you're doing,
Yeah, thank you.
that type of thing.
The book is not published yet, but it's called America in Therapy, and it's going to have a really wonderful subtitle, which I'm not going to share yet because I'm not sure what the publisher is going to decide the subtitle is going to be. But it's America in Therapy, and I have a website that's my name, phyllisleavitt.com. And please go on my website if you want to stay in touch with me. There's a place to sign in with your email, and I can let you know as soon as the book is available. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. And I just made a TikTok account. I haven't
Ooh, yeah.
there yet.
I feel that. I've been working on that too.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's a its own can of worms, I think. But
probably.
it's a great platform. And hey, you know what? I think that this message is something that a lot of Gen Zers will rally around. So,
And that's what I'm hoping, actually.
mhm,
I'm really hoping, people ask me, who do you want your audience to be? And I actually want it to be anyone and everyone, but I'm really hoping to have an audience with young people because
mhm.
I think a lot of young people really do want a shift in our
Yes.
consciousness and they're open to it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I mean, it's very I myself am a like middle of the road millennial, but it
Mm,
has been inspiring to see, my youngest brother, the one who said the
right,
school shootings are a fucked up trauma club.
right.
He's a Gen Zer, and
Mhm.
the passion that he has, he's a political science major.
Beautiful.
Um, and the passion that he has for driving change is really cool to see.
It's
And I
beautiful.
know that a lot of his peers are like that as well. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and we all have something to contribute. This is my lens, other people have other lenses on what's going on that we also need. We need to and that's part of what an abusive society and family doesn't allow. It doesn't allow any divergent voices. It
right.
silences the people who have a difference of opinion or are telling a different truth. And that's part of what we need is a society that really welcomes everyone's point of view so we can put them together and actually work together to find solutions. It's never going to be one person who does it.
Definitely. Well, yeah, I have a lot to think about with this, and I definitely am going to get my hands on the book when it is out. Yeah, Phyllis, thank you so much for sharing your research and all of these thoughts. I think it's really, really valuable, and I hope that the book continues to inspire more people to strive
Thank
for
you
this
so much for
change.
having me. Thank you so much. It's just been it's my passion and it's just been a pleasure to talk with you and share with you and hear, your reflections on what we're talking about as well. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. You've been listening to Wine Diane 69. I'm your host, Rachel Dalton, and let's keep talking.